you very much to both of you for joining us on this episode of The Brief. Now, Mark Merowitz, let me begin with you. The United States, I'm not sure if I can say, is or was the beacon of democracy, especially after what we witnessed, the rampage that we witnessed in the Capitol last week. Do you think the U.S. can still present itself as the beacon of democracy to the world?
Definitely. And of course, a lot of it relates to how we're handling this situation. And the way we're handling it, I think, is absolutely right. The president should be accountable for the statements that he made. He cannot excuse by saying he didn't want violence. His statements speak for themselves. You have a principle in the law, res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. He riled up the crowd. The crowd went and trashed the Capitol. People died. People were hurt. I still see that image of that Capitol police officer being crushed behind the door, screaming in pain. Another Capitol police officer was hit on the head with a fire extinguisher. It's outrageous, unprecedented. And the problem is that the president perpetuated a phony argument, went to court over 60 times, lost every time, including in the Supreme Court where he had 3 nominees that he appointed. Truth of the matter is, he has really subverted and sided and interfered with the American democratic system. Can we continue? Well, of course we're going to continue. And I think the way it's being handled is the right way of being handled. He needs to be accountable. Okay. Now, let's be realistic. Just my last point. Is he going to be impeached and convicted? Impeached, yes. Convicted, no. Is he going to be removed by the vice president or majority of the cabinet? No, because that ultimately requires 2/3 of both houses of Congress, and the conviction of impeachment requires 2/3 of the Senate. But they're going through the motions, and they're making the president accountable. And that's our system, and the president can't get out of that. He can't keep subverting the system. He should stop subverting the system.
Okay.
That's
now,
how I feel about it.
Dr. Mark Thomas, let me come to you. Certainly, what we witnessed in the Capitol last week sent shockwaves across the world. Now, as Mark Merowitz said, will President Trump be impeached twice? Well, it looks likely he will not be. But the question is, should he be impeached?
Yes, thank you, Jafar, for inviting me. First of all, let me say that I agree with everything Professor Merowitz said, but I want to add certain things. I think he should be impeached in the sense that it is unprecedented for an American president, sitting president, to say things that would that potentially incite violence, especially knowing the kind of groups that came to Washington. Part of the group that came to Washington were very much anxious to do something. And you could see that by just looking at the crowd when he was talking. So I think he is smart enough to know that inciting them the way he did, they potentially could do something, such as attacking the Capitol Hill and breaking and entering.
So, Professor, if I may interject here, are you indicating that President Donald Trump was expecting this to happen, or do you think it was something out of his expectation? He did not expect this to happen, and it happened.
It is very hard, actually, to be in the mind of Donald Trump. I mean, he is, as I said many times before, he has personality problems. It's hard to say what he is thinking. It is possible. I mean, I would give him the benefit of the doubt that he didn't know, but my mind tells me that he should have known. I mean, because he has the ability to kind of gauge the people in front of him and figure out what is it that they want, how he can manipulate them. It is hard to believe that he didn't know rationally that will happen, but at the same time, I don't know 100%. I cannot say that he knew or he didn't, but he certainly should be held accountable in the sense. I think it is possible that he would be impeached, but it is unlikely that he would be removed from office because of what Professor Merowitz said about the majority that is required. That said, I think I want to add some other dimension here to the. First of all, let me answer your question about democracy. Democracy is not absolute. Democracy, a democratic system, is relative to other democratic systems that exist, and I think the U.S. Still has potential to be a leader in democracy, but where it will take its democracy, that really remains to be seen, especially in the kinds of changes that we are going to see in the coming 4 years.
Right.
President-elect Biden has put a team in his office now that are going to be taking over, that are very, very, I would say I'd be very suspicious that they are pro-democracy. They are pure interventionists. So that remains to be seen.
Right. We will talk about how the U.S. foreign policy would look like under a Biden administration. But Professor Mark Marowitz, let me come back to you here. Now, talking about who is to blame for the riots, the rampage at the Capitol Hill. Certainly, all of us are talking about President Donald Trump's complicity in whatever happened at the Capitol. But what about those who supported him throughout the last 4 years, and now they're trying to defect from President Donald Trump's team? What would you like to say about those? Don't you think those people are also complicit in exacerbating the whole situation?
I don't think we get anywhere in trying to point fingers at these enablers and complicit. I think we need to go forward and not backward. I think that the challenge of the pandemic, the challenges we face are so insurmountable that we need to move forward. That is why the impeachment, which is only an accusation by the House, is a virtual certainty, because Vice President Pence is not going to remove the president with the majority of the cabinet. It's unlikely. He wants to run for office himself. These enablers, you know, Mitch McConnell and others, look, President Trump had these people in a spell, a mystical spell, and they woke up. They woke up. When they had people surrounding them trying to kill them in the Senate and in the Congress, they woke up. And they woke up and realized that this has got to stop. And listening to McConnell's words, he says it's a death spiral for the Republic. You have to stop objecting. And they actually organized it. They did objections. Ted Cruz kept going on and Josh Hawley kept going on, much to their shame. Shame on them. But they kept doing it. But then the Congress, the Senate, the joint session did confirm President Biden, and our institutions, even after everything that happened, remained whole. Now, so blaming them, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, their careers are over, in my opinion, going forward to Biden. Now, Professor Thomas makes an interesting point about the upcoming administration, but here's the point. Even though the Senate is in the control of the Democrats, right now, there still is a rule called the filibuster in the Senate, which requires for a bill that you have 60 votes in order to pass that. Now, the Democrats, as the majority, could remove that requirement, which would mean that the Democrats could control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Okay. Now, this would be a catastrophe for American democracy, because the Founding Fathers did not like the idea of majority slam dunk rule. Now, let's understand what we mean. Harry Reid, the former majority leader of the Democrats, says, you Democrats, you're in charge, get rid of the filibuster, and then you can pass whatever you want. Okay. But that is the end of our democracy. So to answer your first question, democracy will continue if both parties can work together in a civil fashion. As the best example of that was Speaker Tip O'Neill, Democrat, Speaker of the House, Ronald Reagan, Republican, getting together after a day of disagreeing and sitting down for an evening and having a dinner and talking about that they were friends. Okay. We need more friends here and not so much animus and personal conflict to get over this, because the threat of these people is to the Democrats and the Republicans and to the democracy itself.
Right. Now, Dr. Mark Thomas, let me come to you. I mean, we cannot directly blame those who were close to President Donald Trump before the rampage at Capitol Hill, but certainly those people did play a role in enabling those who committed this crime. What do you think?
I mean, throughout time and throughout the 4 years that they stood behind him, certainly they legitimized much of Donald Trump's rhetoric. So yes, I think in this sense they could be blamed. But the picture is much larger. That's what I wanted to add. This element that I wanted to add. I blame primarily the corporate media, the way it has polarized people, because the corporate media's model has been to specialize in a certain opinion. So you have CNN, MSNBC versus Fox, the several parts of Fox, each specializing in a certain position and bringing in pundits that will support that position, as opposed to bringing two people that may disagree on about an issue and enlighten the viewer with two opposing views. So it has become very difficult in American society, and I've noticed this over and over in the past 2 years, to have a conversation about politics, because whenever you open your mouth about something, you step on a bomb. The person in front of you blows up because he's taking the other position. Because what you have is everybody's being fed a certain line instead of being fed with opposing information where he will sit and make up his opinion. So what we have here is some sort of manifestation of that, some sort of a result of that, and it keeps on continuing. Look, for example, CNN specialized in the impeachment of Trump just after he won the election, up until now. And now we are going to have the opposite probably taking place with Fox, for example. They are going to take, if Fox doesn't take it, maybe Trump himself will have a channel who will take it,
right.
Take the position that the Russians, or not the Russians, I'm sorry, the communists have taken the elections from Donald Trump. So you see this monolithic view being propagated by one media network versus another.
Okay. Now, Dr. Thomas, let me add one more question here. Now, right now, the center of attention revolves around President Donald Trump, but I do want to focus on those who were with him throughout the past 4 years. Now, let me give you a hypothetical situation. Assuming this rampage at the Capitol had taken place 2 years ago, not when President Donald Trump had become an outgoing president, assuming this rampage had taken place 2 years ago, do you think the same Republicans who are coming out condemning the violence, condemning the president's statements, do you think they would have done the same back then if this situation had erupted 2 years ago?
Yes, I understand. So what you imply is, had he not lost the election, would they have forsaken him? I would think this act has been so out of order that I trust that they would have, because it is very hard to defend. I mean, looking at these images and seeing people entering a sacred place like that, semi-sacred place like that, I think I believe they would have still objected. Nobody would be able to stand and defend an act like that. So I think the answer is yes, they would have forsaken him then.
Okay. All right. Now, Professor Mark Marowitz, let me come to you. President Donald Trump is now the outgoing president of the United States in the eyes of the United States and the rest of the world. I think we can all agree on that now. Correct me if I'm wrong. He has proved to be, if not the worst, then one of the worst presidents in the history of the U.S. If President Donald Trump has a legacy, what would that be?
I want to say one point about your previous question in terms of the Republican Party. Look, the Republicans who supported Trump all through the 4 years did this for pragmatic reasons, not because they loved Trump, but they were afraid of getting a primary, afraid of the base going against them. Lindsey Graham said enough is enough, and people chase him in an airport. They're pragmatic. They were concerned. They were worried about the pushback from Trump's base. So I don't know that it was out of love and devotion. Yes, there's certain people that definitely supported him out of sentiment And there are people who were true believers who believed in him. I think about the legacy. I just go to The Economist magazine, and the cover of the magazine, this issue, I just got it, Trump's legacy, a picture of that guy sitting in the chair of the Speaker of the House, putting his feet up or whatever, sitting there. That is his legacy. And it used to be Buchanan who was the worst president, but I think Buchanan has given up, and Trump now, absolutely, without contest, is the worst president this country has ever had. And Republicans, and I happen to be a Republican, Jafar, and I am appalled, embarrassed, shamed, and shocked at this behavior. And the fact that Republicans still continue the same nonsense, to continue to talk about all of this, the election, it's over. Biden is elected in the routine of our society. We're a society of institutions. This is what Hamilton said. About the elections, I do say this. Hamilton said in Federalist Papers, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. Meaning, if the government would be run by angels and they're perfect, everything would be swell. But it's not so. Government is run by people. And people make mistakes. People are not perfect. So that's why we have institutions. Now, if we don't believe in the institutions, then we're over.
Mark, if I may interject here now, I have another question here. Now, this is supposed to be a serious discussion, but it's funny how President Donald Trump has still not conceded. I mean, what is going on in his mind?
Well, his press conference, I think today, or where he was at, usually with the helicopters making noise and he's screaming questions, he likes to do that. He says the impeachment is ridiculous and I never will concede and I'm not going to the inauguration. I really quote the New York Post newspaper, which said, stop the insanity. It's delusional. It's gotten to the point where it's disrupting. Look, we're in a pandemic. The only focus that we should be focusing on now, the only thing we should be focusing on now is getting the vaccine out to the American people and fighting the pandemic, which President Trump has done an absolutely miserable job by by delegating to the states and saying, hey, not my job. It's the job of the states, and did a miserable job until the end with the warp speed, and that didn't even go well. It was a mess. So in retrospect, the legacy, as I say, is summed up by this storming of the Capitol, a one-off, unbelievable event in our history. The second time, the first time was the British troops in 1814 who trashed the Capitol, and the second time was after a rally that a president held, basically saying it's rigged, it's phony, and Giuliani saying trial by combat. You know, this is not acceptable in the society. But again, the Republicans in the House continue to say that they keep going, we have to heal, we have to heal. And the president, I don't like violence. You know, when you say funny, it isn't funny. It stopped being funny.
Right.
It's tragic, and it's got to stop. I don't know how it stops. The way it stops is, and the best comment that was made by anybody was the former Homeland Security Secretary, Jay Johnson, who I happened to work with in a law firm many years ago, said Trump should leave town. He should go to Mar-a-Lago and just stay there. And that's a good point. He should leave town, let Pence run the show. Pence, by the way, when you asked about enablers, Pence had a bit of a resurrection or an epiphany. And he did very, very well at the end. Now, should he have done better before? I can't comment on that. But I'm saying at the end when it counted, he came through and showed his leadership. And that's what we need, leadership. So I'm all for what Pence did. And I think we need to go in the next administration with our heads up and saying, no more of this nonsense. We've got to stop. Although I don't know.
Professor Mark Mayer was talking about Mike Pence's leadership. Better late than never, right?
Absolutely, and I commend him. And he spoke well. He did the right thing, and bravo to President. Now, he's going to remove the president. I would give that a zero probability, and I don't really go to Las Vegas very much. I don't think so.
Now, Dr. Thomas, assuming President Trump.
I want to answer your question to Professor Merowitz about the legacy.
I was actually adding one more point to that. I was going to add one more point to that. If he has a legacy, what does his legacy teach all of us? I mean, not just Americans, but all of us.
I think when it comes to President Trump, we have to distinguish between three things. One is his personality, and I have said that many times. He has personality defects. He is narcissistic. He is willing to do anything for his self-aggrandizement, which is a feature that has in common with many dictators around the world. So he wanted to be that. He wants to be that. So personality-wise, he is problematic. The thing, however, one has to give him credit, and in terms of his legacy, he managed to stay out of war. He managed to for example, he fired John Bolton, who was for having the U.S. invade Iran in order to remove, in his view, to remove the theocracy, which he said it in public. He tried to avoid a direct confrontation with Turkey. He tried to resolve conflict with North Korea. Now, he did not succeed in any of these in terms of having a peace or having a serious resolution to these conflicts. But at least he prevented the U.S. from engaging in a massive violence or engage in war with these countries. Then that because he wanted to focus on the United States, he wanted to withdraw in the sense that to focus on U.S. capabilities. He wanted the European countries to treat the United States fairly in the sense that paying their own share regarding the expenses of NATO. So all of these things, I think it was an attempt on his behalf, but he failed on many of these levels. So history-wise, one thing we know for sure, he didn't engage in a major war, unlike, for example, President Obama, unlike before him, President George Bush.
Okay. Okay. Now, I know, Professor Mark Merowitz, you're short on time. I would like to thank you very much for participating in today's episode of The Brief.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I have students waiting for me for a class.
Thank you very much.
Which is the higher authority. And thank you very, very much. And we have to hope and pray for better times and better things in the next administration.
We are hopeful. Thank you very much, Professor Mark Merowitz. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Now, Dr. Thomas, let's continue with you. Many key developments have taken place when it comes to U.S. politics. I was just listening to the press conference of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He accused Iran of hosting Al-Qaeda. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, he said Iran is the new home base of Al-Qaeda. Now, I'm not sure what is his evidence, but linking Al-Qaeda, a Sunni extremist organization, with Iran, which is a predominantly Shia country, does not make much sense.
Absolutely, Jafar. I'm glad that you saw that speech. It was also minutes ago. I also looked at it. It is bizarre, but this is very typical. For example, also of the Bush administration. And when the Bush administration went into Iraq, they accused Saddam Hussein of housing Al-Qaeda. They even accused that Saddam Hussein coordinated with Al-Qaeda to facilitate the attack on 9/11. Totally baseless, totally propagandistic statements. So you wonder what is the point of Mike Pompeo right at the end of his tenure making these kind of accusations. And usually people who are not familiar with the politics of the Middle East or the religious background of the groups in the Middle East, they don't know what. They may believe him.
This is why he probably came up with this statement, because I'm not sure if everyone would agree with me on this, but those of us who live in Muslim countries know the difference. I mean, this is a very basic difference between the Shias and the Sunnis. So please tell us, why do you think he made such a strong statement and accused Iran of having ties with Al-Qaeda?
Probably, I think he wants to put pressure on the administration, on the incoming administration, not to engage in any negotiations with Iran, so that they would continue the sanction policy and continue a policy maybe towards even the end conducting some form of violent or supporting violent groups within Iran. So he wants to continue the pressure. That's why he said it. He knows he is out, so who cares what he says? But he wants to put the administration in a position, in a defensive position, that look, they are supporting Al Qaeda. And actually, even the way he mentioned it, he moved from Al Qaeda that they are supporting Al Qaeda and Hezbollah. Both of them are. And Hezbollah, again, you are going from Al Qaeda to Hezbollah, and Hezbollah was fighting Al Qaeda in Syria. So. The whole thing makes no sense from somebody.
Okay, let me put another question here, Dr. Thomas. Of course, on surface, it seems highly unlikely for such ties between Iran and Al Qaeda to exist. But, I mean, in the end, it's all politics. Do you think there's any chance that whatever Secretary Pompeo said could be true?
There may be some, when you are a state and when you are faced with a siege like the way Iranian state is facing. I mean, if I want to empathize with the position of Iran, and I have to distinguish between empathize and sympathize. I am under no circumstances I would support a theocracy ruling a country.
Right.
But if I want to put myself in their position and feel about what they are feeling, I think that they have been under siege for a very long time. Not only that, but also a war was propagated on them right after they took power. 8.5 years of war, and a million people died. So they feel followed by the sanctions. So they feel that they are under attack. They are under constant attack. So as a regime ruling a country, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be shocked to know that they may be housing some members of Al Qaeda who could be manipulated, who could do things on their behalf. For example, just to maybe foil certain attempts in Afghanistan, do something here there. So in principle, I wouldn't be shocked, although I would be surprised, but I would not be shocked that it is possible. But the question that Iran actually is one of the main supporters of Al Qaeda, that's false.
Right. Now, assuming this is true, whatever Secretary Pompeo said is true, this certainly changes the whole scenario of the Syrian conflict, doesn't it?
Yes, it actually makes it problematic because, how can you even make sense of it? How can you make sense? I mean, we know where Al Qaeda is, and we know that Iran has, with its militias in Syria, have been. I mean, recently that they have been in the past year have been engaged exclusively in Syria against ISIS. And actually, there has been a resurgence of ISIS in the past 2 months, and I don't know where they are getting this help from. Mm-hmm. Why is it in the past 2 months they have intensified their operations, mainly against the Syrian regime forces and the supporting Iranian-backed militias? But the Al Qaeda, formally, if you want to separate ISIS from Al Qaeda is in the northwest of Syria, and Iran has no connections. There has no physical connection there. That is totally. The accusation is totally nonsensical. So I really don't know. I think I would ask Pompeo to elaborate, to make his accusations a bit more believable for people.
I hope he does, because if he provides some solid evidence, then it will help all of us in understanding the link between Al Qaeda and Iran. Now, Professor Thomas, let me come back to U.S. politics. We are all looking forward to the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden. It comes at a time when we are all facing an unprecedented pandemic. Now, very quickly, what kind of challenges do you think President-elect Biden is going to face in the first few months of his presidency? Do you think this whole turmoil caused by President Donald Trump is going to remain a part of U.S. politics for the next few months, or will it somehow evaporate when President-elect Biden assumes office?
Yes, much of what had been the position that had been taken about the coronavirus pandemic, about the way the Trump administration has handled it. Much of it is political. So I think once President-elect Biden becomes president, I think that is going to be toned down. The focus on the pandemic is going to be reduced, because the team that was put in place is a Trump team, and all he can do is maybe, I don't know what he can do. I think everything that could have possibly been done had already been done in terms of the production, adoption, and distribution of the vaccine. I don't think really there is any room for President Biden to do anything unless he wants to do good to make good on his promises to lock things down. I would be surprised that he would do that, but I wouldn't. But it is a possibility. So I think all of that things, like the anti-Trump things that were brought to the front as politically in order to score points against Trump, that will be going down. I think the real challenge is going to be here. How is he going to handle U.S. policy in the Middle East? And in the Middle East, vis-a-vis China and Russia. And I think the team that he has put in place are hawkish, and actually we are almost like as if it is George W. Bush again. I don't know how Professor Merowitz would have thought about this, because I would presume that he may have different opinions about this. But the way I'm seeing it, we know Antony Blinken is going to be Secretary of State. He is a self-described neocon. He has a long history of supporting Joe Biden, supporting Joe Biden's pro the invasion of Iraq policy. He is well known to be anti-Iran. He is well known to wanting to dismantle Syria into parts. And another supporting position is Brett McGurk. Brett McGurk has been he was the one who was the propagandist on behalf of the YPG. He was the one who converted their military apparatus and made it look more like political. For example, called it the Democratic Forces, yeah. Syrian Democratic Council, right. In order for it not to take any ethnic name. So he is strongly for the continuation of the Obama policy to dismantle Syria. And the third one, you have Victoria Nuland, who is going to be in charge of the anti-Russia policy. So all of these are going to be hawkish. The other thing is about Turkey. Both of these, Antony Blinken and Brett McGurk, they both have made public statements against Turkey, claiming that they want to bring democracy back to the world, restore democracy both in the United States and in the world. In other words, make this to be a crisis of democracy in the United States, that not only in the United States, but we want to restore it in the world. Therefore, we are going to go after all of these leaders that we don't like, instead of having the people of those countries, such as Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Turkey, resolve their own political issues domestically. The U.S. is going to be hawkish, is going to be interventionist in order to create maybe havoc, in order to weaken these individuals that are trying to break away from U.S. orbit.
Okay. Now, Dr. Thomas, my last question to you, again, about President-elect Biden. Now, I want to focus on his presidency for a second. Professor, I remember about a month ago when vaccines against COVID-19 were out, all of us thought that vaccines are the light we were looking for at the end of the tunnel. Now, let me apply this analogy to U.S. politics. Do you think President-elect Joe Biden is the light at the end of the tunnel?
I don't see that. I don't know even how people who support President-elect Biden will think he is the light at the end of the tunnel. I think they supported him because they hated Trump so much. and because there were organizations that were on the grassroots level that were mustering support for Joe Biden because he was an alternative to President Trump. They didn't want for them to have President Trump serve another term was more like a nightmare. So they did everything to elect that. I really don't think anybody could have any, let's say, look at President Biden as being somebody to look up to. And by the way, I mean, within a year or two, I mean, if you just look at the way he has been speaking and the kind of mistakes he has been making when he's speaking, I don't know for how long he can continue be in charge of his faculties. So
okay, let me put it in other words. Do you think Kamala Harris is the light at the end of the tunnel?
I personally don't see her as the light. I mean, she was brought forward because people considered her. Let's say the oligarchs, the billionaires, the multi-billionaires, considered her to be a moderate, a politically moderate person with semi-African American origin. Kind of, it's a new face for a new America. It was something convenient, but personally speaking, I don't see any accomplishment in her lifetime that would warrant me at least to look for her for anything positive. But to be honest with you, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what her international politics are. Most likely, she doesn't know much about it either. She probably will have to educate herself, and we will see what she will do. So that's an open question.
Professor, last question, very important question here. Who do you think will drive America's foreign policy under President-elect Biden?
The neocons. The neocons, if you want to, maybe the neocon is an old term. You can maybe add another, use another term, maybe just the interventionists. The interventionists are going to be leading his foreign policy. And this is going to be a big challenge for the countries that are going to be taking or dealing with the implications of this policy. So we will see what will happen. I hope that these countries will be able to manage this new onslaught that we are going to see. And I hope that President Biden tries to focus more on diplomacy and less on intervention and sanctions and all of that. And at least to recognize the fact that the U.S., it is not in the best interest of the U.S. to be the sole power dominating the world. It is much better to have a multipolar system where you can see more balance taking place. So I don't see this utter rejection of regional countries trying to kind of feel independent. I don't like the idea of seeing the United States being offended by seeing a strong Russia, being offended by seeing a strong Turkey, a strong Iran. To the contrary, I think this should make the world more balanced, and it will be less costly for the United States. I mean, look, when we were one-sided, we went ahead and we invaded Iraq. What was the outcome of that? We handed Iraq to whom we thought was our enemy, which is Iran. So the mistakes are so obvious, and I don't. For that reason, I really hope that maybe he would be a bit more balanced before he completely loses his mind.
Okay, Professor Mark Thomas, let's hope for the best. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Professor. Thank you very much for talking to us on A News.
Thank you, Jafar.
All right, now this brings us to the end of this episode of The Brief. In a matter of few more days from now, President-elect Joe Biden will assume office as the President of the United States. We wish him all the very best, and we certainly hope that under his leadership, the turmoil caused within the U.S. politics, primarily by President Donald Trump, would de-escalate. Let's hope for the best. Let's remain positive. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jafar Hasnan, and I'll see you with another episode of The Brief this Thursday.